Darci Strickland, weekdays on Friends at 5 and News 19 at 6.
Hurricane Ian expected to make landfall along South Carolina's coast within the hour. This is a live look at Myrtle Beach, and as you can see for yourself, the seas are anything but calm at this hour.
We saw the Snapchat videos, we saw the Instagram videos, and a lot of the videos the kids were saying we thought this was a drill. Do you feel like you guys are maybe becoming desensitized to this type of thing?
The inauguration started just after 11 at the State House, where McMaster, Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette, and all of the state's constitutional officers took the oath of office. McMaster's address covered a number of topics from education to the Supreme Court and South Carolina's economy. My first question for the table, and remember, anybody can jump in and answer. What has it been like to have had a seat at the table? What have you heard from the community now that they've seen your story? Classic designs, bright colors, timeless pieces. Couple that with the names of Michelle Obama, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Beyonce, and the next name you're likely to hear will be that of designer Sergio Hudson. The Fairfield County native has made a name for himself on runways, at award shows, and in boardrooms. Very few coaches in history have a resume that rivals that of legendary Hall of Famer Willie Jeffries. He was the first black football coach at a Division I predominantly white college, and for years he was the winningest coach in South Carolina State University football history. His life is an example of what it means to play offense and defense well, because the more he achieved, the more he had an opportunity to give coaches a chance to call plays when they otherwise couldn't. When the day finally arrived that she could ring the bell to signify the completion of chemo, the chief and her tribe showed up in a big way.
I think that I may be the only person in the world whose husband brought me a beer to celebrate the occasion. He bought me a beer that's called a bell ringer.
That was the first time Leisha Johnson heard the words breast cancer and her name in the same sentence. She was just 43 years old and hadn't missed an annual mammogram starting at age 40. Something just didn't feel right. She scheduled a doctor's appointment, and after an ultrasound, a mammogram, and a needle biopsy, this lifelong healthcare provider was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer.
Why me? How could this be me? And this is what I do. I help people in this field.
The irony writes itself. A student who doesn't go into the library in high school grows up to be a librarian and English teacher who works with educators statewide to promote quality instruction as a student and literacy advocate. Because of more than a half of a century of dedication to education, we are recognizing her at Eau Claire High School as the News 19 Teacher of the Week. Congratulations! You are our Teacher of the Week. When we find out about teachers who are going above and beyond like Ms. Kaufman, we can't just let it go. We have to let everyone know about them. I am Darci with WLTX, and you are our Teacher of the Week.
I feel so bad because I feel like there's so many other teachers who deserve all this.
Andrea Jr., this is literally what visitors will see when they come through the front doors of the International African American Museum. A little history on the museum. This today was the reality of a vision more than 20 years in the making. 23 years ago, former Charleston Mayor Joe Riley said in his State of the City address that this part of Charleston, this land needed to be reclaimed and turned into something that everyone could be proud of. Gaston's Wharf sits right outside. The museum sits on the land where 45% of Africans who came to the United States enslaved came through that wharf. So today, a day filled with lots of emotion, from trauma to pride, but a day that once you walk into this museum, you leave looking at history very differently. Let's take a look at what is called the Carolina Gold and why it's been so important to visitors here today.
Behind us on this side, we talk about individuals. We pulled out just 2 or 3 actual stories of actual people who lived during this time to help folks kind of narrow down from that big picture You know, as much as we haven't told these stories, there was always an effort to capture them and preserve them. Around the 1940s, we had the Federal Writers Project, and oral historians were sent into the Deep South to record the stories of folks who had been formerly enslaved. So the records are there, the notes are there, the audio is there. So when you come to the museum, we introduce you to a couple of these stories. And because this was a federal project, we actually have the ability to use their own voices and their own words inside the exhibitions. And so that has been, I think, really moving for a lot of folks, but also very connecting to be able to actually hear voices telling their own stories.
Even as visitors take time to experience and learn what it was like to be enslaved in South Carolina, there are galleries within the museum where the walls speak.
What you are looking at here is the port of arrival. So our two smallest galleries are the port of departure and the port of arrival. Very, very simple galleries. Black walls with names on them. This port of arrival has the names of enslaved peoples. Here we have our own records, and we have the records of many of the plantations here in the Low Country. And so we selected some names and put them on this wall. These are obviously American given names, not the names that folks came over here with, because sometimes it's hard to make 12 million people into a person. This modern idea we have around saying people's names is one of the themes that we took into the museum.
One of the key themes also within the museum is the history behind the faith of enslaved people. Miss DeMette Jenkins, good to see you. We're going to bring her in right now and talk a little bit more about your role here at the museum and what it means to make sure that people understand that it's more than just about slavery in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role is the Director of Education and Engagement for faith-based communities. And so what I'm to do is, one, to engage the people around the world to make sure that they understand the sacredness of this site. And then to connect with our faith communities, religious institutions, theological institutions, to be in partnership with them so that we can do programs around faith, spirituality, and religion. Because what we want to people to know is that every history that's being told here, there's a faith element that's connected to it. And so our ancestors prayed all the time, they sang all the time, they always sought to whomever God they were reaching to make sure that life would get better for them by and by someday. And so we're at the by and by now. The things that they prayed for are coming to revelation today.
I understand how true that is, because literally one of the first exhibits you get to when you come through the door is the praise house.
And we want people to understand that there are praise houses everywhere, on plantations, off-site of plantations, and that's where our ancestors would go and sing and fellowship and connect to their higher power, to whomever their God was. And so we can't exclude that when we're talking about history, because that's part of the history.
And my final question, 23 years in the making, how do you feel at the end of day one?
I am excited, a little tired, but I am excited because what I'm really excited about are those persons who sat at the table early on, the steering committees, who were the visionaries. They didn't have any idea where the money was coming from, where we were going to be built, but they kept the dream alive. And here we are today, 23 years later, in the building that they dreamt and prayed about.
And it worked. Every bit of it worked. Ms. Jenkins, thank you so much for your vision and your hard work and everything that went into making today possible. So coming up in the next half hour of Friends at 5, we're going to talk to some of those 700 people who came through the doors earlier today. As you can see behind me, there are still, well, not right now, you can't see me. They must have walked off while I was in the middle of the interview with Ms. Jenkins, but just a couple of minutes ago, there were people who were still making their way through the exhibit, and the doors closed 10 minutes ago. So we'll check in with you guys again in the second half hour of Friends at 5.